Hello everyone, how are you today? Well, that's good. That's good that everyone's feeling well today. Okay. That's just done something strange with my chat. No, there we go. Got it back again. All right, I'm going to start the PowerPoint and share my screen. Oh, I lost it. How's everyone coming along with the assessment task? Is everyone managing okay? You've made a start. Still got just over a week to go until it's due. Right. Okay, I've got a weird thing going on there. There we go. Okay. All right, so hopefully you can all see that now. Can someone give me a thumbs up or something like that, just so that I know we're all on track. Struggling to get started on the essay itself. Yeah, I know it's always hard to find the motivation sometimes and not procrastinate about things. All right, so today we are looking at these learning outcomes. So like in the last tutorial, I like to point out what the learning outcomes are for the whole module at the start. So this is part of my self-regulated learning framework of teaching. So we've got these three learning outcomes, and we looked at sort of the first two a little bit in the workshop. And for the tutorial, I want to focus more on the application of the information processing model of memory. So this is, if you're thinking about your essay, this would be included in item 2, I think it is. So item 1 was the one where it was nature and nurture. And then there was one where we talked about Piaget, Vygotsky, and information processing theories. So this is the theory that we're going to have a look at today. All right, I've got a little Menti to get our brains in warmed up and ready to go. So I'll get that link and I'll put it over here. If you click on that, that's going to open a tab on your computer. If you prefer to do it on your phone like I do, I will put the number in here just in case you can't see it properly on your screen. So the number's there as well. And the question is, what helps you stay focused when you are learning? So what things do you do to help yourself stay focused? I'm glad everything's making sense then. Just going back to your comment before there. That's always good when things make sense. So nobody's got any suggestions for how they keep themselves focused? So what about things like you want to be somewhere quiet, or maybe you like to listen to music, or maybe you like to, I don't know, dance while you're studying? That's what happens if I listen to music. I start dancing and then I've just lost the whole thing. So that's not a good focus thing for me. All right. If nobody has any opinions about that, I guess we will. Oh, have we got some opinions now? Yes. Okay. That was funny, wasn't it, that they didn't come through? Connection with context is really good. Connection with context is like an intrinsic motivation. So that's where you have an intrinsic interest in it. Sometimes kids are not intrinsically interested in things, and we can put a little bit of extrinsic pressure on them. However, if you put too much extrinsic pressure, that can backfire as well. So things like little tests or little rewards or something that gets them motivated from the outside can sometimes be helpful. This is the same for future goals. Future goals is intrinsic motivation. Very good. I don't know what happened there where all your things weren't coming through before. That was very strange. All right, so we are going to look at the information processing theory or information processing model. And this is sort of the standard diagram you will get if you Google that. And this is about how your brain processes the information that is bombarding it all the time. So the stimuli or the stimulus is coming in through the sights and the sounds and the experiences around us. You know, they can be any sort of things coming into your sensory system. It's got a fairly small capacity. I'll just get my pointer. And a really short duration. So it might only last less than a second, and you haven't even sort of picked up that something is happening, and it'll be forgotten. We have to actually direct our attention to something if we want to have it come into our working memory. So attention acts like a filter and selects the information that moves into the working memory. And then the working memory is like the temporary workspace for thinking. So when the information is in here, this has a limited size. So different textbooks will say different things about how big it is. Some will say it's, you know, between 4 and 7. This one says between 7 and 9. If you think of that in terms of numbers, if you were trying to remember somebody's telephone number, which can have between, well, mobile numbers have 10 numbers, I think. So if you're trying to remember a mobile number, you're already over capacity. So unless you do some little trick, you can't remember it. It's really quite difficult for your brain to hold that many things at once. The reason that this says chunks here is sometimes we can trick our working memory by chunking information so that a little chunk comes in and it only fills up one slot. So for telephone numbers, for example, you might break it up into like sets of 3. So you might go 040, that goes into one slot, and then blah, 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 and then blah, 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 blah for the last one. And then it's only taking up 3 slots in your working memory, and it's much easier to remember. The other thing that you might do is rehearse it. So you keep saying it over and over again until you write it down. And then that is going to help with this process called encoding, which is where we move the memory from our working memory into our long-term memory. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about rehearsal, and see how it says up here, maintenance and elaboratives. There's different kinds of learning strategies or study strategies that you can use to help encode the memories into your long-term memory. I'm going to touch on it this week, but then in a couple of weeks' time, when I talk about learning strategies, I'm going to come back to it again. All right, so we're going to have a look at each of the separate phases. So the first part is your sensory memory. So your brain is receiving thousands of signals all the time. So it's receiving sounds and colors and movements and the feeling of your clothes on you and the seat that you're sitting on and all sorts of things. And that's too many things for your brain to process all at once. So things are coming in subconsciously that you're not aware of, and your brain will filter them out and try to choose things that are vital for your survival generally, evolutionarily speaking, for you to focus your attention on. So there's two different systems in your brain that help with this filtering. One is called the reticular activating system, and it's in the brainstem, which is an older part of your brain, and it monitors everything that's happening around you for any sort of novelty or change. So if there's a sudden movement, snake in the grass, that kind of thing, your reticular activating system is watching out for that. And if it's something important, like a snake in the grass, then it's going to direct your attention to it. You also have an area of your brain called the salience network, which is evolutionarily speaking more modern, younger, and it's sort of in the cortex of your brain, and it's spread out across a number of different areas of the cortex. And it focuses on things that it thinks is meaningful in whatever way you personally think things are meaningful. Or salient. So salient is the word for important to look at right now. So together, those two things can move information from the sensory into the working. Okay, so if it catches your attention, it's going to go into working memory. And I've got an example of something you might have experienced with the reticular activating system. Is if you suddenly decide you're going to buy something or you're really interested in something, say it's, red Volkswagens, suddenly your reticular activating system will see heaps of red Volkswagens everywhere you go, red Volkswagens everywhere. They've always been there. It's just that you didn't notice them before because they weren't important to you then. But once they become important, your reticular activating system will point them out to you. This is also one of the things where they talk about gratitude practices and noticing good things instead of noticing bad things all the time. So if you can sort of train your reticular activating system to focus on good things, then you'll notice more good things. But if you sort of doom scroll, see all the bad things all the time, then your reticular activating system is fully on board with that because it wants to keep you safe. Okay, so it is going to notice all the bad things. So once it's gone through there, we have it in attention and we are moving it into the working memory. So the working memory is a short-term space for thinking and understanding things. So this is where a lot of learning actually happens, okay? We compare new information with things we already know, and we start to try to organize and understand the meaning of things, okay? But it's only it can only hold a small amount of information. So about 7 things for a few seconds, unless you actively rehearse them. So rehearsal can be just as simple as saying it over and over again until you get a chance to write it down, or it can be more elaborative learning strategies like explaining it to somebody else or drawing a picture of it. Note sketching is a really popular thing on the internet these days. There's a lot of people who will teach you how to note sketch and things like that. So things that will keep it active long enough for those connections between the neurons that we talked about in the workshop to happen. Okay, so when the neurons fire together, they wire together. and wiring together is encoding. Okay, so when the neural patterns stabilize, we call that encoding, and the information moves from the working memory into the long-term memory. And part of the way it does that is by forming new connections between the neurons, and synaptogenesis. Okay, so in the online material, I use the word synaptogenesis, which is where new synapses grow as the brain links new and existing information together. But if you don't do any of that rehearsal or organization or elaboration, then you'll eventually forget all about it. So for teachers, this means that learners need opportunities to think with new material. Okay, so they need to explain it, they need to use it, they need to relate it to something they already know so that we can get encoding to happen. Once the information has been encoded, it moves into the long-term memory. Now, the brain's storage system is pretty big. Okay, it says infinite there and it says duration permanent, and there certainly are people who can remember every single thing that ever happened to them every day of their life, but there's not that many of those people. So most of us forget things after a while. The information is stored in there in networks, and we're going to revisit this idea again in another lecture where we talk about schema theory. So if we can get it to be a part of a network, it's more likely that we'll be able to remember it again, so that it's not held as a single fact, just sort of randomly sitting around in your brain. It's part of a network. And when I was driving down from Townsville to here to move down here for this job, this song came on Spotify. I don't listen to music very often. I'm more of a Sound of Silence kind of person. But anyway, I had Spotify on, and this song from when I was like 18 came on, and I have never even thought about that song since I was 18. But suddenly I knew all of the words to this song. They were there in my long-term memory. And if you'd asked me even 5 minutes before if I knew that song existed, I would have said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. But that's, the sort of way that it holds it in a network, So once the stimulus was like, okay, I'm going to reach in and I'm going to grab that part of the network, and it just pulled the whole network out. I knew every single word. It was bizarre. So the more connections there are to that information, the easier retrieval becomes. And another little story about that is that some years back, they used to say, in order to have a good study environment, this is mainly for higher education students and people doing HSC and stuff. So not little kids, but bigger kids. Have a dedicated study area and keep everything the same there, and whenever you sit down you'll slip into study mode and all of that sort of thing. And there are some studies that suggest that is true, but there are other studies that suggest that the more links you can make to that information, the easier it will be to remember it. So if you study your chemistry at your desk, and also at McDonald's, and also at a cafe listening to jazz music, there's all these other connotations and contexts and links that are linked to the memory of the chemistry now. And that can sometimes, for some people, make it even easier to retrieve that information. The more you use it, the stronger the connections will be. Okay, so you've got to do things more than once, and you've got to get your learners to interact with the material more than once. And one of the ways that you can do that is through interleaving. So you study some chemistry, then you study some English, and then you come back and you study some chemistry again. Okay, and that's one of the things that you might notice about the way that I teach. So I'm going to teach you about information processing this week, And then next week, we're going to revisit Vygotsky. And then the week after that, I'm going to extend the information about information processing. Okay, so I do a little bit of interweaving. I've just got a little chat here. Memory masters often use narrative structures. That's called the, what is it? The loci of something. I used to know what that was called. And you imagine that you're walking through somewhere that you know, like a mansion or your house or down the street, and you think of different pieces of information as you go. So then every time you walk that, you get that piece of information. And the stories are good too. So little stories about characters doing things in the stories. And they're all very good memory techniques. And learning is definitely a change in the structure of your brain. And so it has to be remembering something. But one part that I find interesting when I'm reading papers is that there's not enough discussion about understanding the information. Okay, so you don't just want the kids to be able to name all of the digits of pi. You want them to know what pi is and how it works and how you would apply it and things like that. So memory masters are certainly very impressive, but Richard Feynman says we don't actually need to know the names of things, we need to know how they work. So that's an interesting take as well. I just wanted to say there that forgetting isn't just the absence of learning. So you may have learnt it and then you forget it. It's what happens when the connections aren't reactivated often enough. And just as unused pathways in the brain fade through pruning, unused memories will weaken as well. So one of the things that's in the content online is that as you grow, so this is sort of linking in with Piaget, as the baby grows, the brain is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But then we get to adolescence, and there's a whole restructuring. There's a pruning, a massive pruning, and the total number of connections between things is actually reduced a little bit when you're a teenager. And that can be very trying time for teachers. Any of Year 9 classes that I've had have always been a little bit less well behaved than other classes. And I can remember when I was in high school myself, I don't remember much from high school, but I remember we were the worst Year 9 ever, and all of our parents got called to the school because of how terrible we were. I feel like that must happen every year. All right, so now we've seen how information moves through the system. Let's have a look at where it could break down. So it could break down at the sensory memory stage. So if the attention never locks on because of a distraction or because a learner is overstimulated, then the information simply doesn't enter the working memory. Okay, so it doesn't go any further. At the working memory stage, learners might receive too much new information. So we might be trying to cram 12 pieces of information in there and they've only got 4 spaces to hold it. Okay, so information's falling out all over the place. And we'll come back to that in a couple of weeks when we look at cognitive load theory. The other thing is that they might not rehearse it. So they've heard it one time, you said it in class and then they never thought about it again. So if they don't rehearse it, then it's not going to form a stable connection. And then at the long-term stage, the issue is often maintenance. So that's, again, if you don't revisit it, if you don't restudy it and look at it again and use it in new ways, then the neural connections will weaken. So neurons that fire together wire together, and neurons that fire out of sync lose their link. So if you don't use it, you lose it. So for teachers, this means that a powerful learning strategies could be simple ones like asking students to recall something or to explain it or to use it in a new way. And you kind of have to do it regularly. So this is about that interleaving. So you've got to sort of pop back and go, oh, remember that thing we did last week? Well, that's related to this thing that we're going to do this week. And I tend to do that a lot. Now, I've got a little video that I haven't quite got ready that I'm going to show you. Okay. This one here. You're all seeing it before I've done it, so you'll all know the
With Canva Code, anything is possible, even if you think debugging involves pest control.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half miss the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it, but did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Okay, let's get rid of that. How many people saw the gorilla? Only if you know it's there. There have been plenty of people who did not see the gorilla. Yes, missed input because you were looking for something else. You know, you were focused on counting how many times the white player passed the ball. So in the other tutorials, many people missed the gorilla, and most people missed the curtain change and the person leaving. The experiment itself is about 15 years old now. It was 2010 or something that came out, which is just about when I became a teacher, and I did use that in my science classes to show students when we were talking about brain stuff. Yes, because you're looking for the gorilla because you've seen the experiment before and then you don't see the other thing. And that's what happened to me. The gorilla was huge. Of course, the gorilla came in. I knew it was going to come in and totally missed the curtain and the player. So I was glad that he'd made that change so that, you know, people could people could see it. All right, so what we're going to do now is some retrieval practice. Okay, so this is, I think, 5 or 6 multiple choice questions about what we've just done. That's an example of retrieval practice. Okay, so during a noisy group activity, one student never hears the teacher's instructions to pack up. Where is the potential problem in the IPT model? All right, and don't forget these what do you call it? Menti is anonymous. Okay, so I don't know who's played or hasn't played. So you should feel free to just jump in there and make mistakes. Nobody's judging you. But also, there have been studies that show if you sit on the fence and wait for the answer to be shown to you at the end, you will, I will post the link again, not remember it. Okay, so if you are fence sitting, you are less likely to remember the answer. than if you commit and choose one of the options. If you choose the wrong one, doesn't really matter because I'm going to show you what the right one is. You might feel a little pang. Oh, I missed it. And if you get the right one, you will get a little dopamine hit. Okay, so don't fence sit. Make sure you choose an answer. If you're interested in this retrieval as a study strategy or a learning tool, there's been quite a lot of research on it. It's also called the testing effect. So they did some experiments where they showed that if you do these little mini quizzes compared to rereading, so this group A got to do the mini quizzes and group B got to reread the information again. Group A remembers it for longer and gets a better mark in the test at the end than group B who just reread it. All right, so let's have a look. And the correct answer is attention filter. Okay, so he didn't hear the teacher's instruction to pack up because overstimulation, too much distraction, whatever. So it never actually got to his working memory or her working memory. All right, so a student repeats a new concept definition to themselves several times while writing it in their notes. Which part of the system are they using? All right, so look, very good. Working memory with a rehearsal. Two students read the same passage. One explains it in their own words, the other rereads it silently. Who is more likely to remember and why? Alrighty, so that is correct. The paraphraser. Both of those things are repetition. It's true. But the paraphraser is processing it more deeply and probably making connections while they're paraphrasing. Whereas the rereader has only done one extra repetition. So the rereader would probably have to reread it 20 or 30 times to get the same value as the paraphraser. All right, a teacher introduces vocabulary words by linking them to familiar concepts from last week. Which process is being supported? All right, so a little bit of variability there. So this one is an example of retrieval from long-term memory because we're linking it to something from last week. So the thing from last week is in our long-term memory. Okay. Working memory, you can't really maintain working memory. So we can only maintain long-term memory. So that's why that one's not right. Okay, a class learned a poem last month but haven't revisited it since. Most can no longer recite it. What happened inside the brain? All right, that is the neural connections weakened from disuse. Okay, because this is from last month, but they haven't revisited it. Okay, so they can't remember it. Unlike that random song. Must have sang it a lot when I was 18. A student listens carefully during a science demonstration but remembers almost nothing later. Which process most likely failed? Nope. Oh, that's interesting. We're all over the place there. I actually have got a little story to say about this one. The answer is encoding. And this is an example of the illusion of comprehension. So the student has listened very carefully, so they were paying attention. They listened very carefully, and at the time, they understood. They went, "Oh, this is a really interesting science demonstration." Okay, but because they didn't do any encoding of that information, they didn't remember it later. So this is the same as when you go to a lecture where the lecturer is really organized and they just flow through and everything just makes total sense. And you're sitting there and you go, oh, obviously that's how it is. And then later you're trying to remember it and you go, no, I don't remember any of that. Because at the time you thought you understood. And so you didn't kind of work on it and do any cognitive work of your own to get those neurons to fire together. And they've done some studies, and one of them was where they had one lecturer who was very organized versus one that was more disorganized. Okay. And what they found was overall, there was no difference in the way that the students performed. But the key thing was that the students who did the work still got a good mark. Okay, so students who thought that they understood it and didn't do any work got a bad mark. And for the other group, everyone was very frustrated that the lecturer was so disorganized and they had to put quite a bit of effort in to understand what the lecturer was trying to tell them. And so they actually did quite well because they did the cognitive work themselves. Okay, so you can't read a textbook or listen to a lecture and expect it to actually go into your long-term memory. There has to be some sort of thinking about it or mulling it over or something to help it get to your long-term memory. And a study strategy that is not very good is highlighting. Okay, so in all the studies that they do about efficacy of different study strategies, highlighting comes out as the bottom all the time, and rereading. Because when you're highlighting or rereading it, you're still in the context of the information. And then when you get into the exam and you're in a different context and the lecturer asks a question just off to the side of what you learned, because they want you to apply that in a new situation, it doesn't make any sense anymore. You don't remember. So unless the lecturer asks exactly what's in the book, then most people would get it wrong just from the highlighting. All right, so the key points that we looked at today was that attention is going to direct what enters the system, and rehearsal is going to stabilize the new neural connections. If we do some deeper processing, it's going to help build meaning, because normally that's going to make it connect to other things that we know. Retrieval, bringing it back into our mind, reactivates and strengthens the networks, and forgetting happens when pathways aren't used. So you'd notice by now, I mean, it's only week 2, but you would notice that I use retrieval a lot. Okay, I use all of these multiple choice questions in class, and I also use them on the web page that we've got. So wherever I can, I've tried to put MCQs so that you get feedback straight away. But for some, I just put little things for you to think about. But that's to try to help you direct your thoughts and give you some way of processing that information. So in the question, yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask a question, especially as people grow older, they seem to forget things
It's true.
they learn. Yeah, they learn at later stage. Like you remember the song you heard when you were 18, okay, and
Yes.
and still remember all the words. Yeah. But
Yes, it was funny.
if you knew that song when you are much older, you probably would not remember the words anymore. So what is
That could be
responsible?
true.
Is
It
it
depends. Some old people are really good at remembering and some are not. So some are aging, the effects of aging and the breakdown of the connections in your brain. But then there's things like dementia that are more significant breakdowns of the connections in your brain. So part of it is just a natural part of aging, that you just can't keep up all the connections anymore. It's a very energy expensive thing to do. And part of it is how much those people get out and about. So some people, I've seen people who've retired and then they just sit down and they don't do anything anymore, and they tend to go downhill really quickly because they're not engaging their brain and being purposeful in their living. So part of it is just natural, and then
about,
part of it is other things.
about how can we explain things they knew when they were much younger? They can still recite it, but things they came to know at later age is very difficult. And we even find it in some extreme cases, people who had dementia. Now, the language they spoke
Mm.
when they were younger, they could still speak it. But the languages they learned later in age, they just forgot it.
Well,
So
with
what
dementia, that's pathological. So that's other things happening inside the brain. Like, for example, with Alzheimer's dementia, that's when there's this protein called tau protein that clogs up the neurons. So it gets it in a normal, it's normally there. Okay. So we have it, everyone has it, but it's normal waste product, and your brain deals with it and gets rid of it. But in Alzheimer's disease, there's a break in the metabolic pathways, and your cells don't get rid of that waste product anymore, and then they build up. And when they build up, it causes the cells to die. And so when you look at the brain scans of somebody who has Alzheimer's dementia, there's actually big holes in the brain where the tissue isn't there anymore. So there's no connections anymore.
Yes.
And the same with Lewy body dementia. That's one where the brain makes these deposits of a similar protein, but it deposits them into Lewy bodies, and then the Lewy bodies are all through the brain and they're interfering with the connections between the neurons. So some of it is just, you know, natural aging, and some of it can be pathological. Does that answer the question? Yep, so I'll keep going then. All right, so I was going to say about Piaget. In the assessment task, there's a question that asks you to sort of talk about Piaget, Vygotsky, and information processing theory. So I just want to talk about that here. And I added Bronfenbrenner in as well, because just for completion, you know, in the first week, I sort of pared back the number of theories that I decided to teach you. And I just gave you the 3. So I might as well tell you how information processing theory relates to all 3 of them. So Piaget was interested in mapping how thinking changes over time as the child's brain matures. Okay, so what I said before, the baby starts with a certain number of neurons and connections, and then, you know, as it grows, its brain gets bigger and bigger. And information processing theory is going to tell us that because of attention and working memory and reasoning all being practiced all the time as the baby is growing and having more connections, then their ability to do those things is going to get better and faster and more efficient as they make more connections. Okay, so even though it feels like it's staged, it's actually just continuous. Vygotsky emphasized learning through social interactions and language. So IPT complements this by showing us how the brain processes those interactions. So when we're talking to someone, we're holding what they're saying in our working memory, and we might be comparing it to existing ideas that we have, and then encoding that new meanings into things through repetition and use in our interactions. And then Bronfenbrenner reminded us that learning happens within layers of context, so family, school, community, and IPT adds a cognitive layer. So those environments that we're in are providing sensory and emotional input, and the brain is going to filter and process and store that. So this new theory that I'm giving you is not replacing those old ones. It's just telling you what's happening inside the actual brain while development and social processes are playing out. I want to point out that IPT is the cognitive blueprint that we're going to use for the rest of the module. So the first half of the module, week 1, 2, and 3, we sort of focus on development. And then in the second half, 4, 5, and 6, we focus more on learning and how we'll use this information about development with the learning strategies that we're going to use in class. So we're going to come back in a couple of weeks' time and look at cognitive load theory, which is about managing the limits of working memory. And we are going to talk about schema theory, which is about understanding the networks and how your brain organizes those networks. And then we're going to look at metacognition and self-regulated learning, because they're my favorite things. And we'll talk about managing attention and rehearsal and retrieval when we do that. So this is me priming you. Okay, so priming you for what's coming next. So I'm really enjoying pointing out my teaching strategies to you, because before I came here, I taught science, and the students who learn science are not really interested in learning, even though I secretly try to teach them how to learn at the same time. All right, so as part of my self-regulated learning framework, at the end of the module, you should come back and look at your learning outcomes because those are your goals, and then have a think about whether you can do all of those things. Okay, so remembering that your Bloom's triangle, those verbs that are in the bold are telling you the depth of information, the depth that you need. Okay, so I've got explain there, that's sort of a moderately high one. Describe is kind of a lower one, and apply is like probably the highest we will go to. When you are doing your pedagogy subjects, you will go further because you will do create. Okay, so you are creating learning journeys by pulling in all the theories you're learning from all of the other subjects. Okay, so just to wrap up, learning depends on attention, rehearsal, and retrieval, not just effort. So, you know, a child might be putting in a lot of effort, but they might be putting it in the wrong place. You know, they might be like highlighting or rereading. That's effortful, but it might not be as effective as rehearsal and retrieval might be. The brain strengthens connections each time information is revisited or reused, and effective teaching designs experiences that work with, not against these processes. Oh, what have I done? Science, Feynman, name drops. Oh, no, I didn't. I taught biology. I'm a biology teacher. And then at the uni I worked at before here, I taught anatomy and physiology, so to nurses, and I really wanted them to learn how to learn. All right, I'm not going to do that last chat. I think we'll just chat. So I'll close that so that I can see you again, and then you can ask me questions. From Melanie there. Hi, Vicky. Is this the reason why I remember things better if I write them down? Yes. Yes, it is. That's rehearsal. So that's a strategy. That's a learning strategy. It's good to know learning strategies. This second part of your question here, or is there another reason writing helps memory? Are you referring to the study that they did about the typing versus the writing? I personally think writing is helpful and does link to more areas of your brain, but there is some criticism of that study about the typing.
There. I
Yeah.
They've actually started doing it. I work in school, and they've actually started really taking the kids back over to writing in books rather than typing on a computer, particularly in science, actually, particularly the
Yes,
science.
if I was there, I would definitely have notebooks, and they would be writing in notebooks. If I was at school, I would be that teacher.
I mean, it started obviously lots of conversations, but I've noticed personally with starting studying again, I definitely notice a link between handwriting and remembering things.
Yeah.
Yeah, wondered, is that information processing theory in action or?
I think, and I didn't mention this in your tutorial, but I did mention it in some of the others. If you have more sensations coupled with something, you'll remember it better. So like if I said to you, remember what you had for dinner last Wednesday night, you know, maybe you can, maybe you can't. What if I said last month? Can you do it then? Or, you know, I can because I eat the same thing every night, but most people don't do that and they wouldn't be able to remember. Okay. But if I said, what did you have for dinner on your birthday when you went out with your husband and your family and it was great and you were at a restaurant, and, you know, there's a lot of other emotions and connections associated with the food that you ate that night. Okay, so that's where I think the writing by hand is coming in because there are more sensations. It takes longer to do it. When I did my neuro degree, we had to draw 10 slices of the brain Like you couldn't just get a picture and label a picture. You had to physically draw the 10 slices of the brain and then label them. And that was an exercise in slowing down and looking at what you're doing. So I would definitely be the teacher who makes you write.
I know it helps me personally, that's all. I thought, yeah. I wondered if it was something to do with the physical act rather than that it could just be the rehearsal and the slowing down, like you said.
Yeah, that I did watch a video about that paper and I was interested. There's a guy that I follow on YouTube who reads research papers and then tells you, you know, pros and cons of whether it was good research or not very good research. And there were some things about that paper, which I haven't actually had a chance to read yet, that were not good things. Like, so that the typing was in an awkward way versus the writing was fairly straightforward and easy for the student to do. So if you make something awkward, it's going to be harder and it's going to be using up more working memory. So it's going to be harder for the attention to focus on the right thing. No worries. Yes, and that's the, you know, it's different for everybody, Dylan. So I do use typing for, and diagrams are awesome. Diagrams are the best of all because there's a really good TED talk where a guy draws a picture of something and he gets you to do it as he's talking about how good drawing is for remembering. And then at the end, you know, you close the picture and then he asks you where things were on the page, like where was the house and where was this and where was that. And everybody can remember, obviously, because we're very spatial. And I always used to tell the anatomy and physiology students, you know, if you can do something like a concept map rather than a big page full of text, you're going to remember because you're a spatial being and you remember where things are in space. So diagrams are really good. I type now too because when I was doing my PhD, I wrote so many things down as notes and then I couldn't find them. So then I had to put them in Obsidian where I could search. Does anyone have any other questions? Yes, I love Obsidian. Yeah, I wanted to do a research project on teaching students how to use Obsidian and whether that made them remember things better. Any questions about the, yep, another question there.
Okay. Can we say if you look at Bloom's taxonomy, that when you are closer to the apex of the cone, if you practice closer to the apex of the cone, it always strengthens your knowledge about or strengthen your memory about anything. The closer you are to the apex, is it correct as such something to say?
No, I don't think so. No, I think some people will say there's not very much difference in level between some of the levels. I like to think of it as the ones at the bottom. So remember, and I do have more to say about this in a future module because we do learn about blooms, but you need to remember things before you can understand them, okay? And you need to understand them before you can apply them. But, you know, you don't need to be able to apply them in order to analyze situations necessarily. Those two sort of feel like they're the same level to me, apply and analyze, because I could get you to apply a theory or I could get you to analyze a scenario and tell me what theories were at play, and they'd both be sort of equivalent amounts of knowledge. And the same for evaluate and create, because Bloom actually had evaluate at the top. So I think, you know, you guys are going to be evaluating all the time. Evaluate whether this theory is better than that theory to apply in my class, or this learning strategy is better than that learning strategy. So you have to understand things before you can evaluate them for sure. But then I think once you get up to the top end there, they're all pretty much the same. create is about creating things that didn't exist before. So you kind of have to understand things in order to be able to create new things. Not necessarily, like not for art and stuff, but you know, for theories, you have to understand you have to understand all the things down the bottom before you can create a new theory. So it depends how you apply those things, I guess.
Apparently, maybe it doesn't do much when it comes to strengthening knowledge, but maybe when you think of cognitive ability, you know, like I would say someone in a PhD program must be doing a lot with creating, you know, and then less with just remembering or analyzing. So it's
Yeah.
like you just
Yeah.
operate on the cognitive. Yeah.
Yes. So PhD levels are definitely creating, and that's what I used to say to my anatomy and physiology students secretly on the side, because I wasn't actually teaching them about learning. That, you know, I need you to be at this apply level. I need you to apply this information about anatomy to like that person over there with a broken leg. So I need you to apply it. I don't need you just to remember the names of the bones. I need some more application than that. And then I would say, you know, we'll be creating things when you get to your PhD. But you guys will be creating things as soon as you get out into the workplace, because you'll be making learning journeys for your students. Does anyone have any questions about the assessment? Are we all good with the assessment? Well, if you don't have any questions, you're free to leave at any time. If you have questions later, you can just pop them in the chat discussion board thing on the Blackboard. And I will see you all next week. Have a good week.
Thanks, Beck. See you next week.
See you next
So
week. All right, I've got a question there. Tristan has a question. Expectation is all answers are meant to be in a reflective writing style. Well, the reflecting writing guide is the best one to use for this, I think, because you're going to say some stuff about theory and you're going to try to apply it somewhere. Okay, so it's that application of the theory that we want. And you can do it through reflection. I think that's why they made it a reflective thing. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. All right, have a good week.